You ever heard of Joe Cocker? Yeah. And be what it sounds like. Get a Bible for Bible. Yeah, no. No. Without all the heavy drugs. Yeah. I don't need to give myself PTSD from my own singing. I bet you can't guess where we are. Right, Miss Van?
It's 4.
That's 14, in case you haven't figured that out.
You know something, 10-4?
10-4, I'm sorry. You were using CB lingo. I had to think about it for a minute there. Yeah, I could see her being a trucker. Long haul over the road. Was that you, Ms. Van? Your handle was meanness? I've seen her drive. The safest thing is to stand in front of her.
I've seen her on the motorcycle. That would be a real easy.
I got a motorcycle. When I get it up and running, I'll put you on the back and take you for a trip. Whether you come back or not is up to me.
How long have you been here now?
A while. I forget. Time flies when you have when you're having a good time.
But you're still going to get that bike running.
Well, no, it was running up until about January of last year. Actually, it was running all the way through the year, but it wasn't tagged. And so I was like, no, I'll get it tagged. And then we had that springtime deluge. And I know that there are some people that ride motorcycles in the rain. This is free for the rest of y'all. Yeah. We call those people organ donors. I don't ride in the rain unless I have to. And when I mean have to, I mean I was riding and it was sunny, and then God decided to pelt me with some rain. And then I put on my rain gear if I can't find a restaurant to pull into and stay. So that was free. It was just totally free. That wasn't a rabbit. That was free. It would have only been a rabbit if I brought it up. They brought it up. I answered the question. And I hadn't even started yet, but we are in 1 Samuel chapter 24. Starting in verse 1. We'll read 22 verses. Well, I'll be reading them. I want you to read along. When Saul returned from following the Philistines, he was told, "Behold, David is in the wilderness of Engedi." Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all of Israel and went down to seek David and his men in front of the wild goats and in front of the Wildgoats Rock. And when he came to the sheepfold by the way, where there was a cave, Saul went in and relieved himself. Now, David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave. And the men of David said to him, "Here is the day of which the Lord has said to you, Behold, I will give your enemy into your hands, and you shall do to him as it seems good to you." And David arose and stealthily cut off the corner of Saul's robe. And afterwards David's heart struck him because he had cut off the corner of Saul's robe. And he said to his men, "Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord," lowercase l, "for the Lord," uppercase L, is anointed, or to the Lord's anointed, to put my hand out against him, and seeing he is the Lord's anointed. So David persuaded his men with these words, and they did not permit them to attack Saul. And Saul rose and left the cave and went on his way. Afterwards, David also rose and went out of the cave and called after Saul, "My lord the king." And when Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the earth to pay homage. And David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of men who say, Behold, David seeks to harm you? Behold, this day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you today into my hand in the cave. And some told me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not put my hand out against the Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. And see, my father," this would be Saul, not his real father, "the corner of your robe in my hand. For the fact that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you, you may know and see that there is no wrong or treason in my hand. I have not sinned against you, though you hunt me, or you hunt my life to take it. May the Lord judge between me and you. May the Lord avenge me against you, but my hand shall not be against you. As the proverb of the ancients say, out of wicked comes wickedness, but my hand shall not be against you. And after whom has the king of Israel come out? After whom do you pursue? After a dead dog? After a flea? May the Lord therefore be judged and give sentence between you and me, and see to it that the plea of my cause be deliver me from your hand. And as soon as David had finished speaking these words, Saul said, Is this your voice, my son David? And Saul lifted up his voice and wept. And he said to David, You are more righteous than I, for you have not repaid me. You have repaid me good words. I have repaid you evil. And you have declared this day how you have dealt well with me, that in that you did not kill me when the Lord put me into your hands. For if a man finds his enemy, will he let him go away safely? So may the Lord reward you with good for what you have done to me this day. And now behold, I know that thou shalt surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand. Swear to me, therefore, by the Lord, that you will not cut off my offspring after me, and that you will not destroy my name out of the house of my father. And David swore to Saul. Then Saul went home, and David and his men went up to the stronghold. All right, we all know this story, right? The Bible has such a nice way of putting crude things, doesn't it? They were in the inside of the cave, while Saul was at the mouth of the cave. Last week, we saw this interplay between my coughing and non-coughing. No, between Saul and David. David looks out, and before he acts, he seeks the face of the Lord and asks the Lord, should I do this? And the Lord says yes. Or will these men betray me? And the Lord says yes. Saul just assumes that every time something happens, it's the Lord's good fortune. Notice the difference between the two men. If the roles were reversed, would Saul only cut the garment? Only if it was attached to his neck. We see this interesting interplay. David, is David the king? He's anointed to be king. As a matter of fact, the Lord has said, I will cut Saul off. David could simply look at this situation and go, how often we do that? We look at the situation, God, and the situation has presented itself, and it looks wonderful, and we go, God has given me this ability. And we act. Sometimes things present themselves in a way. But here with the case of David, notice what he said. Let's take a look. We'll look at some verses. Verse 2. Saul took 3,000 chosen men of all of Israel and went down to seek David. How many men does David have? Does anybody remember? 600. Saul has 3,000. Considerable force, considerable number. He need every one of them, and when you get inside those little rocks and crags and things like that, because it'll take that many men to ferret him out. David is down in a place people are selling him out, but notice what the text says. We're going to talk about Saul going into the cave here for a minute, because there's just a humorous aspect to it. You know, I mean, if you were David's men inside the cave, you got a show and some entertainment at the same time. So Saul went out into the cave and relieved himself, and David and his men were in the innermost part of the cave. All 600 of his men were in this cave.
Big cave.
Big cave. They could have taken this man out.
You never knew what hit him.
Would have never known what hit him.
Relieving himself.
He was taking a dump.
That's what
He was doing a class. He was doing a class 2 download. Okay, that's what he was doing. Cause I mean,
So he wasn't asleep, Steve.
no, he wasn't. Well, unless he's like a typical guy.
Reading the Sports Illustrated.
Futures are up in Benghazi. Yeah, that's how big the stone tablets were. He was in there, and written in invisible ink. So yeah, he was in there and he was relieving himself. And David's men were at the back of the cave, so it's not a pleasant scene, and it's not a pleasant smell, and it's not a pleasant sight. I don't know what possessed David to say, I think I'll sneak up and cut his garment while he's doing number 2. To me, I was like going, you've got to be mad. I mean, seriously, I'd just knock him out with a rock and then take his clothes. I mean, come on. But that's what David chooses to do. Saul was a big guy. He was head and shoulders over everybody else. So David cuts the corner of his robe. But notice what happens when David does this. Check this out. Notice the men are like going, hey, God has put this man into your hands. Sometimes our friends kind of like to speak for God. I was telling somebody the other day, God gets blamed for a whole lot he just don't do. It looks like it's from God. It looks like it's the right thing to do. It looks like the godly thing to do. It has all the look. But what did David do in chapter 23 before he did anything? He inquired of the Lord. This time he goes down, and what happens? Let's take a look. He cuts off the corner of Saul's robe. And within a minute of doing it, afterwards, very quickly, his heart sunk. His heart sunk because he knew that what he had done is improper and against the will of God. He reached out his hand against whom? The anointed person of God, the king. Now David is anointed too. David could have just taken this guy out and said, I'm the anointed king. Samuel anointed me king. Dave's already told me that Saul's kingdom is to be cut off. Maybe it is by my hand. Now here's the thing. David carries this through, and when we get over into 2 Samuel, David kills a man because he had the guts to kill the king. You think Saul would have thought twice about touching the anointed of the Lord? He's been trying to pin this boy to the wall since he got dunked with oil, right? It's a good thing his targeting acquisition radar is on the fritz, because that brother couldn't throw a spear straight if he wanted to.
Well, God wouldn't let him, even if his acquisition stuff was going.
That's right.
David had Goliath's sword. What he did, that sucker must have been like 6 foot long.
Well, I mean, I doubt he used Goliath's sword. Probably by this time, David's had enough time to refit and rearm because these men are with him now. At the time, he was.
I thought he picked it up.
He did. He picked it up at is it Nob? The priest Nob picks it up at Nob, and he's carried it with him. But now he's had time to go. He's been in the Philistines and acted like a madman. He's already attacked several other a little smaller city states. He's already beat off these people from from attacking a city last week. So he's probably had enough time to refit with daggers and swords more suitable for somebody his size.
Several swords.
Yeah, I mean.
He wasn't a very big guy anyway.
No, I mean, I'll give you a great example. I have a heavy battle rifle that shoots a .308 bullet, and I was carrying it around just because I got it, and I was cleaning it. And dude, that dude is heavy. And then I went and I picked up my AR. So I go, man, and it was heavy at one time. It's got a heavy barrel. I went, dude, this thing is light. It's not light. It's because I've been lugging this heavy thing around. David's been lugging this giant sword around. Probably went, I think I'll get something more in my size. You know, I think I'll get something a little bit more me. And so he got him a sword and probably has a nice sharp dagger.
His initials were.
With his, embossed in the handle. Because, I mean, that's what's the style back then. Ivory, Davide.
How did he keep 600? If you've ever been in a cave, they echo sound. drop one little rock.
Well, I think Saul was pretty well engaged in what he was doing,
He was dead.
or was reading. Let's just say Saul was reading.
There was 600 men in there, somebody was laughing.
Probably could have smelled it.
I don't think he could have smelled him over what he was doing. But it doesn't say how many men are in there, but David had 600 men with him. And so, either they were all in the cave, and some of those caves in the ancient Near Eastern world can go long, very long. And so, he's definitely in there with a handful of his chosen men. And he sneaks up and he cuts the robe. And immediately after cutting the robe, his heart sinks. His heart struck him. How many of us have looked at situations where we believe this is something that God wants us to do, and the minute we do it, guilt comes? Because that's exactly what it happens. He has been struck with guilt because his actions, he knows, are illegal and immoral and ungodly. He has reached out his hand against the king. Now, the king is a tyrant. I think we could all vote successfully to say that Saul deserves death. Right? Well, let's do that. How many think that Saul deserves to be killed? Let's use the Texas logic, the man needed killing. No, seriously, how many people think Saul needs to die? How many people think that Saul does not need to die? Are you guys, some of you, nobody raised their hand on the second time. Okay, this is almost like, what was it, the time I was, anyhow. I was in the business meeting when I asked all in favor and everything.
But if he would have killed him in that cave, could have walked up right behind him and given him one big chop with a sword right on the neck, it'd been no more Saul. But then the people would not have accepted him.
There you go, Brother Walter. He would have been seen as a usurper of the crown. Because what did Saul say he was?
The anointed one of the...
Well, Saul kept saying this man was seeking to take my throne. He's a usurper. He's rised up against me. All these things. Those people would have listened to that mess. And David would never have had legitimacy. Even though Samuel would have said, no, I anointed him as king. The temptation to strike against other folks is easy. There are people that love to stir up strife and conflict and division and everything else and reach out and try to harm one another.
Well, didn't they? The people were demanding.
The people wanted a king and they got it. Because what does Samuel say to the people? You will have a king like the other nations. Your sons will work for him. You have forfeited your land. You have forfeited a tenth of your crop. You have forfeited your daughters. All these things. And they got it. And now look at David.
Well, look what happened when Jeroboam became king.
Mm-hmm.
The people said, lighten our taxes.
That's right. That's right. And he listened to the young men and said, my pinky will be bigger than my father's waist. Essentially, if you thought my dad's taxes were heavy, you ain't seen nothing. Causes a split and causes the kingdom to divide and tear together. Or tear apart. Tear together. I don't know how you tear together. I went to public school.
I think too, at this point in David's life, God called him a man after his own heart. I think he really was seeking to be godly. And then when he had sinned and he realized it instantly,
Yeah.
as we do realize it instantly that we should have done whatever it is that we did, then he mourned that.
Absolutely.
Because he was God's man.
And just like, and you see this when Nathan comes and hits him.
Yes.
Saul builds this elaborate sin, and I don't want to give it away too much because you won't show up for the 2 Samuel part. David believes he's gotten away with it and no one has seen. And Nathan weaves a web to trap him. And it's not malicious. It's to get David past the denial. And David gives a command and says, this man shall surely die. And Nathan goes, he thought he got away with it. Nathan goes, well, consequently, you're him. Actually, the Hebrew translation is, you demand. You demand. That's how the Hebrew translates. You demand. Which apparently they spoke street back in Hebrew days. Yeah, they were probably ratcheted back then. Believe that was ratcheted? Believe that? I don't know how we got that. Anyhow, pow, pow, pow. Now that was a rabbit, Chris Lusk. But you see that even when Nathan comes, immediately he is heartbroken, right? And you see this, and this is the difference, I think, between, and why David is the premier king and the one by which all the kings are going to be measured against, is because when he sins, he is heartbroken. When he sins, he recognizes that what he has done is sinful. What his men would have said, dude, kill him, 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 kill him. You have the right to kill him. You're the king. This guy's the usurper. Kill him. It's easy. Look, I'll just take a gun, go up and get him. Bam, bam, bam. We're done. Cuts the robe. Heartbroken. Cuts the robe. Guilt-ridden. Why? I have stretched out my hand against the Lord's anointed. I have reached out and done something against the Lord's anointed. I have taken action against the Lord's anointed. And so what you have is you have David realizing the fact that it's not his job to take out God's man. See, a lot of times we think it's our job to take out God's man. It's not. It's God's job. Now, sometimes he uses us in a right way to remove folks, in the right way to take care of folks. But it'd be like going, well, God tells me to kill the president. And for those of you watching me, I am not advocating the killing of the president. But there are people that would say, the Lord has told me to kill the president. And the president shows up in Killeen, Texas with a clear line of sight and go, Lord's delivered him into my hand.
Well, was that for him? Nobody did it.
That's right. That's not the case. And that's not the case here. Walter hits a very good point. David would never have been seen as legitimate. Secondly, Saul is still the king. Saul is still the man to be king. So, for David to reach out his hand is to do what?
It's a sin.
It's a sin. It's treason. It's sedition. All these things. Well, I can justify it. Great. Still treason. It's still sedition. By the way, was the king's authority only if the king was a good king?
No.
Go back and read what Samuel says to the people. Says to the people.
Well, look how many bad kings they had.
Oh my goodness. Well, Walter, you're right. The northern tribe went 19 for 19 bad kings, and the southern tribe did a split ticket, 9 for 9, I believe. Is there 9 for 9 or 8 for 8? No, 8 for 8 would be 16. It was 9 for 9. So.
But every one of them, a bad king or a good king, they all had feet of clay.
They did. They did. They did. And I think what you see with those is you have the frailty of the human condition. I have seen people that should never been put in charge in the army who were in charge in the army. And many of you can attest to that, am I right? I have looked in it, I've walked in and go, oh, hi, you're in charge. Where's my 4187? Request for transfer. We have seen people who are stealing air, right? We know these people, and sometimes they get in charge. And they make life miserable for everybody. Saul's a bad king. Saul's a rotten man. Saul was still God's chosen man. And for David to attack this man, though he has every right to do so in the eyes of his men, in the eyes of God, does David have this right? No, because you see it by the reaction. Saul would not have had a single compunction to kill David. Walked up, slit his throat, walked out of the cave with his head in his hand and said, look what God did for me. You know, God didn't have anything to do with it. Right? That's the character of the two men that you have. That's the notion that you have before them.
I think that's why God made Saul such a bad spirit chucker.
Well, and I think that too. And here's another thing too. When I was in the Army, I had the fortune of following the either no chaplain at all or the absolute worst chaplain in existence. Because the only way is up. My last chaplain I fell in after behind him was banned from every company AO by every commander and first sergeant and banned from the battalion AO.
It's pretty bad for a chaplain.
That's bad for a chaplain. That's 6 companies that say we don't want you. And then I threw him out of my own office. And he outranked me. And I going, so when are you leaving? Well, I'll be here for 2 weeks.
Not here.
You're done. Get out of my office. You can't tell me that. I'm going to go talk to the brigade chaplain, and then I'm going to grab a burger. And when I get back, you'd better be gone. He was gone. Well, he went and cried to the XO, and the XO said, get out. I hate you. Get out. Chaplain Payne must hate you too. Get out. I didn't really hate the man, but he was a lech, and in basic training, that's a bad combination. That's why he got banned from every place. So, you know, the only place for me was to go up. And so, you know, David is going to follow a guy who's a bad king. And man, he blows the top of it until that one other incident that we have. He does a great job. That's another rabbit. He cuts the robe. He persuades his men with the fact that it is not my responsibility to reach out against the Lord's anointed. That's not my task. That's not my job. I'm not in garbage removal. But he doesn't stop there. He could have simply cut the robe off and sent it to Saul later down the road and said, hey, brother, leave me alone because the next time you're in a cage, I'm going to give you a Colombian bow tie, necktie. If you don't know what that is, for God's sakes, don't Google it. You don't want to see that picture. Cut your throat. Whip out the jammy and flat blast you. That's street for get a gun and shoot you if you didn't figure that one out. So David persuaded his men with words, and he did not permit them to attack Saul. Saul got up. That's how we know he's doing a class 2, not a class 1. And he left the cave. Afterward, fairly quickly after Saul moves out, David goes out of the cave and calls out to Saul and says what? Don't come back here, sucker.
He apologizes.
He does. He gets down on his knee and prostrates himself before the man who has sought to kill him.
That was a very dangerous thing to do.
Extremely dangerous thing to do. It would have been easier to stay in the cave and go, I did a bad thing. I just toss it over here and no one will ever know that I had done this. I'll dig a hole, burn it, bury it, and then I'll burn the shovel and bury it. No trace. Very dangerous thing. That takes a lot of commitment in the Lord to go out to the man who has sought to kill you at every turn and then instigate. Hi, while you were in the cave relieving yourself, I snuck up behind you and I cut your robe. That has the potential to go totally wrong very quickly. But notice what God does. Notice God's protection. See, David doesn't have to take Saul out because David is protected by whom?
God.
It said so last week in chapter 23, right? The Lord will not allow Saul to capture David.
Or hit him with the spear.
Or hit him with the spear. When Saul got close and they were on two mountainsides, the Lord sends a natural enemy to attack Israel, the Philistines, and Saul has to withdraw. My lord the king. When Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the earth and paid homage. Why do you listen to the words of men who say, behold, David seeks to harm you? Now really, is it the words of men that are really filling Saul's mind with this? Some are. Doeg is one. The men of Ziph are another. But really, who is the words inside Saul? I just gave it away, right? It's the words inside Saul. It's Saul. Well, it's a polite thing to say. Luther, when he sent articles of rebuke to the Pope, he didn't write initially, Dear Antichrist, it has come to my attention that you have been selling indulgences for the building of St. Peter's Basilica. Christ will strike thee dead, Mr. Antichrist. No, he begins to write to the Pope and he says, I think, does he call him Father? I forget what he calls him. Basically, he addresses him as His Excellency. His Excellency the Pope. Please quit listening to the malingering words of those who are taking you astray. Who's really causing the indulgences to come into play? The Pope. Look, Pope Leo had to pay for the Sistine Chapel. Selling indulgences was a great money maker. Get out of hell for a piece of silver. Right? I mean, how many of you would, if you didn't believe in grace, and believe you had to work your way to heaven, but you could take the fast track? How many of you have ever been in the HOV lane with a stuffed animal with the ears folded down to where it looks like a human being? How many? No, please don't raise your hand. We like the easy way. But Luther doesn't say, hey, heretic, you're selling the indulgences that are absolutely have no founding in Scripture. He addresses it as though it's other men that are poisoning the mind of the Pope. Why? He's not seeking to do direct confrontation. He's seeking to bring about change, reconciliation. My Lord, please quit listening to the voices from outside men that are poisoning you against me. Behold, this day the Lord has seen, your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you today into my hand in the cave. You, my Lord, lowercase l, were placed into my hands, uppercase L. I could have taken you out and left you there, and no one would have known. But I spared you. I said, I will not put my hand against the hand of my Lord, lowercase l, for he is the Lord's anointed. See, my Father, again, a statement of endearment, familiarity, family tie. Because he is he's his father-in-law, is he not? That's right. Language that basically says, though I should bear a grudge against you, though I should be someone that attacks you, I bear you no harm. I could have killed you. I treat you as a father. You are the sovereign of this land. I am your servant. I have spared you. The corner of your robe is in my hand. For the fact I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you. Now that's close. Have you ever been close to being killed? It's a very sobering thought. I never was close downrange. There's a couple of times that things got a little weird. But when I was a machinist, I came close to about 3 times. One time I was working with some sandpaper to bring a part into tolerance and to smooth up the tolerance. And this machine is spinning about 3,000 RPMs, and this thing will not stop with whatever gets in it. And the sandpaper came around, and it wrapped around my hand and tied it to the spindle. And I can't reach the emergency stop. And if it tightens anymore, it's going to pull me in and wrap me around that spindle. And my hand slides out. I sat down for 20 minutes, and I was white as a sheet. I was thinking, man, this is going to be one ugly mess for them to clean up, because it's going to be painful for the first 3 seconds. Another time, I was cutting some bar off on a chop saw, and it was a long piece, and it rolled into the blade of the saw, and it shot up and put a hole in the ceiling, and it came right down, and something knocked me out of the way, and it speared in the floor right where I was standing. I again had to sit down for a few minutes and get control of my nerves. Fortunately, I had pretty good retention of other areas, but I'll let you figure that one out. It's a little unnerving. Proximity to death typically unnerves people. Saul was probably a little unnerved here. And when I was defenseless, this guy could have taken me out and nothing. Notice the interplay. And the sad thing is, Saul will leave, and here in a few weeks, Saul will be right back at it. I did not kill you. You may know and see that there is no wrong or treason in my hand. I am not going to lift my hand against you. I am not a treacherous individual. I bear you no harm. The ill will is all from your side. Have you ever been in a situation where you have tried to take the high road repeatedly and the person continues to persist in taking the low road? It's hard taking the high road. It's also dangerous. We see this here with David. Verse 12, may the Lord judge between me and you. May the Lord avenge me against you. Somebody asked me, it was you this morning, about a special type of prayer. There's a prayer called imprecatory prayer. And a lot of times, a lot of people want to whip that bad boy out as the first club out of the bag because it's cool. That's when you ask the Lord to destroy your opponent. Lord, I do not like the person in front of me in the left lane. I don't usually have my eyes closed while I'm driving because that guy will stop, but the speed limit is 75, and he's doing 40. I ask, Lord, that not only do you smite him, but you obliterate his car so I can pass through and get to 75, 85, 95. I'm just doing the speed of traffic. That would be imprecatory prayer. We kind of like that because, man, that's like spooky powers. God, kill that guy. The problem is, it's usually a last resort method. It would be weird. Do you see David praying imprecatory prayer against Saul the first time he throws the javelin? Lord, the next time he throws the javelin, let it boomerang, it spear him, butt to the wall. No. This is after a prolonged period of Saul pressing him, and then look at how it's phrased. May the Lord be my judge and avenge me against you, because you are the ones continuing in hostility against me, even though I have done you no wrong. There's no malice in my heart. There's no activity that's going on. But my hand shall not be against you. I will not cause you harm, but I am asking the Lord to step in and take you out. This is a mild form of it, but this would still fit in the concept of an imprecatory prayer. After whom has the king of Israel come out? Am I someone that you do need to pursue? No. I'm not a threat to you. I'm not a seditious person. I'm not a rebel. I have been your best commander. I have been your best general. I have been your personal bodyguard. I have been your personal attendant. I am still your son-in-law. I am your son's best friend. Am I a dog? That's just the same thing that kind of that Goliath says, am I a dog that you would come out to greet me? Now, it's a different context. Goliath thought that he was all that in a bag of chips. Am I a dead dog? After a flea? Well, it's not am I, but after a dead dog. After a flea? May the Lord, therefore, judge and give sentence between me and you, and see to it and plead my cause and deliver me from your hand. I'm asking the Lord to do what I cannot, because whose anointed is he? He's the Lord's. I can't touch this man because he is the anointed of the Lord, but the Lord can sure touch this man. Give me a sentence against him. Give me a verdict against him. May this man stop what he is doing, or Lord, you do what I cannot. And Saul lifted up his voice and wept, and he said to David, brilliant words, you are more righteous than I, for you have repaid me good, whereas I would have repaid you evil. And you have declared this day how you have dealt well with me, in that you did not kill me when the Lord put you into my hands. I would have killed you right where you're at. That's really what he's saying. But you have been far more righteous in your behavior to me than I have ever been to you. And the case against you, David, is trumped up by the king, who happens to be myself. You see the two natures of the men. Saul admits, and he has a moment of lucid thought where he's not, I believe, being persecuted by the spirit that comes upon him, and goes, I have been totally unrighteous to you. And it'd be great if the story stops and Saul takes David back and they become BFFs on Facebook. That's best friends forever. BFFs on Facebook, and they hang out and they go and they wage war, and man, the kingdom's great. And Saul in his old age looks at David and puts the crown upon his head and says, you now are the king of Israel. Well, that's not how this happens. Saul retreats, goes away, and in a little bit decides he's going to kill David again. We see this pattern, right? I throw a spear. I didn't mean to throw the spear. Let me throw a spear. I didn't mean to throw the spear. Let me kill you. I didn't mean to kill you. Jonathan sticks up for me. Now I'm going to kill Jonathan. I didn't mean it. I mean, this is like a bad case of like Snapped. Where's Delight? She's not here. Clark, tell Delight she needs to watch Snapped. All right. Huh? Saul probably is a little bit on the abusive side, kind of looks like. But that's also because he's got a evil spirit persecuting him. We'll finish out here. For if a man finds his enemy, will he let him go away safe? So may the Lord reward you with good for what you have done to me this day. Now behold, I know that you shall surely be king, and that your kingdom, and that the king of Israel shall be established in your hand. Swear by me, therefore, by the Lord, that you will not cut off my offspring after me. Now this is key. Why is Saul worried about his offspring?
Because he's the heir.
That's right. When a king deposes another king, if you're the family member of the king that gets deposed, you disappear. You just, and no one asks about you. Hey, didn't Saul Saul didn't have a brother. Yeah, he had no, he didn't. Yeah, he had, no. He didn't have anybody. No, you didn't see nothing.
He's an only child.
He was the only child. And his only children, they didn't exist either. I thought he had a son named Jonathan. No.
He got killed in the battle.
He didn't get killed. He didn't exist. We took him out. I'm sorry. He didn't exist. We buried him next to the piece of cloth that we buried in the cave. The new king kills everybody. Why? No reprisals. He does not want reprisals. And so Saul is asking that his lineage does not die. This is something Jonathan also has asked of David. And David holds his promise. Mephibosheth, he could have killed Mephibosheth because he was an easy target. He was a cripple. But actually, if you read the story, he sits at the king's table for the rest of his life.
Boy, David would keep an eye on him.
Yeah. I think it was out of his love for Jonathan. So that my name is not destroyed out of my father's house. Lineage to the Jews are very important. Especially when they go in captivity. That's why they write it down. That's why when you get into this whole thing in the captivity of, and this guy beget, and this guy beget, and this guy beget, and this guy beget. What seems to be monotonous information for you is vital information to the Jews, which is why when Jesus comes along and you get the same lineage recording in both Luke and in Matthew with certain differences, and we look and go, what this again? It's vital. Why? Because it demonstrates who Jesus' parents are and the lineage in which he comes through. And all the way back, was it Matthew through Abraham and Luke through Adam? That's some long records. And David swore to Saul, and Saul went home, and David and his men went to the stronghold. And everything ended peachy keen. No. For the time being. David was allowed to escape. Do we see the parallel between the two men? I mean, this last two chapters really demonstrates the striking difference between the two men. One would have gutted David like a stuck pig and not thought twice about it, and then declared, this is the thing that's the kicker, then declared that God did it. The other man cuts the robe and realizes that he was violating the will of God. You see the difference in the hearts of the two men? Massive difference. The church has folks like this. Oh, this is God's will, and people act on that. And then others that have a good tie-in to the will of God, and when they do things that they know to be wrong, are so heartbroken over it. I think Saul, if you were to pull this story forward, he would be a Christian in name only. Because does he exhibit any godly aptitude? Not a bit. And he admits it. David is heartbroken at every opportunity where he has these engagements. Questions? If you have them, I'll be taking a cough drop.
The Jews sure begat a lot.
They did. Right after relieving themselves in caves. Yeah, they didn't have TV.
One of the things that I saw in that story is the fact that David did not confront him in the cave.
No.
Secret from his men. When he walked out of the cave, he was in front of his men.
That's right.
And several things happened there. David prostrated himself by bowing to the ground
That's right.
and making himself a target.
That's right.
But if Saul had killed him at that point, he would have lost some power in his army's eyes too. I think that was part of how God protected him.
Saul would have definitely lost a great deal of credibility because he strikes an unarmed man. He could claim that he has divine right to do so because he is the king. But just like when Saul orders the death of the priest at Nob and all of his men go, I'm not doing this. The men, more than likely, a lot of those men that were with Saul were trained by David. And so you have that interplay. You're right.
They led them into battle to victory over many foes that had been treating Israel ugly. So he was, in their eyes, a great leader.
Yes, absolutely. And so you have this, and you're right. That's one of the ways in which the Lord was protecting David. Secondly, Saul would have had to have done this not in the eyes of David's men, who were rogues, bandits, and rebels, but in front of his men, Saul's men. That was Steph's phone. It's okay. In front of his men, in front of his 3,000 men, who know David, know David's character, and that would be a hard pill to swallow. That'd be a hard pill to swallow. So you're right. That's a great way in which the Lord had protected David by having David come out of the cave, and putting himself in a very vulnerable state. Any other questions before we dismiss?
Kind of makes me wonder if Saul's whole encounter after this David coming out was more of a, well, he's kind of put me in a spot here where I'm either a really bad guy or I'm humble.
I think when you look at what he says, by you have been more righteous than I think that's where you have a moment where Saul has a moment of lucid thought, because Saul, I do not think Saul is fully right in the head. But that's the best argument I can put forward, you know what I'm saying? I think there's an aspect where Saul is on the spot. I think there's an aspect, and I think that's what saves him. There's that, but you also see where Saul has tried to kill David and not cared who was there. Or at least tried to kill Jonathan and not cared who was there. And so I think what you have there is Saul realizing the content of his behavior. I've seen people that are absolute wicked things realize the concept of their behavior, but then go back to being that wicked thing again. So,
Well, sometimes they get so demented, they don't think they're doing wicked.
Okay. I think Saul is kind of in that category. I think Saul is at the point, because if he can say, this is God's will, and it not be God's will, that you've got not just a moral problem, you've got a theological problem. You got a poor theological problem. Any other questions before we go? All right. Well, let's close out with a word of prayer, and we'll circle around and do prayer requests. Gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the drastic interplay between Saul and David. An interplay that we see today in our society, an interplay we see today around the world. Men justifying behavior because they believe they have God's approval to do so. Men put in positions to attack, but yet realizing that that would be violation of what you want. It's very easy to look at a situation and go, this is God's will, without consulting for you, and not think about the repercussions of actions. We thank you for the interplay between the two. We thank you for just the stark contrast between these two men. The example to follow of David. The being willing to be exposed, being willing to possibly be killed, to do what is the right thing. We ask your blessing upon us and your watch care over us as we go out here this week and take your name and light to a hurting and dying world. We ask these things in your name we pray. Amen. All right. I'll move my stuff out of the way.